everybody, welcome back to the Consummate Athlete Podcast. I'm Molly Herford, and as of this week, I'm finally a registered licensed yoga instructor, as well as an author of multiple books on cycling and writer about all things fitness related and doer of most things fitness related.
And I'm Peter Glassford. I'm wondering why the collagen that I put in my coffee is not dissolving like usual. I just returned from the gym where I work as a kinesiologist and also an endurance coach.
Hashtag bulletproof.
Not really. I mean, it's, I guess, similar. It's sort of the component amino acids of the protein are more so than fat. But I guess similar problems.
I was actually wondering what you put in your coffee. So.
Maybe less disaster pants, but...
Oh boy, we're going there already. Actually, that was a perfect mention as we're getting into race day issues today.
That is the topic of today's podcast.
Yeah, so we're doing a Q&A. I'd been doing an article about race day stuff, and I just kind of posted on Twitter if anyone had any race day questions or issues, and I think I got 70-odd responses, which is the most responses since I asked about saddle sores like 4 years ago that prompted me writing a whole book on the topic. So we figured at least a podcast on the topic made sense in this case.
I mean, it's a pretty common issue, right? And I think the fact that it's common also makes it sort of normal, which is sometimes helpful. I think we always joke about how, people always say, oh, it's not nerves, you're just excited. Just embrace embrace the excitement of the race. And I don't know if that's helpful always, but I guess that's the idea. You do want to be what they call in sports psych is aroused. So there's an optimal arousal. This is the inverted U, you may recall from your Psych 101. And the idea is that, if you're just mopey, like you've been watching cartoons all morning and you just show up on the line and you're not really paying attention and you're half asleep and you're not really challenged by the race, or you're not nervous about the race, where you have to get into that fight or flight sort of mindset or arousal, then you're not going to do as well. And if you're over excited, over aroused, so to speak, that's where you make mistakes. You become really focused on random things. You're trying to focus on a lot of things. You make mistakes. You fall over. We've all been there. You crash. You perform poorly because you're just on the wrong side of that inverted U, right? So we want to be in that optimal zone. Mm-hmm. And then the trick is, how do we get to that optimal zone?
Yeah. So this is also a really good episode for me to be recording this week, as it is leading up to my first race since Ironman, actually, so since early August of last year. And also, just putting it out there, my first road race in 6 years or so. So I'm heading down to Killington to do the Killington stage race with my Bike Red Share Coffee team. Really excited about that.
And I mean, I guess that's, in some ways a good example here that, do you feel extra nervous because it's a little unknown, a little out of your usual?
I actually don't know what I feel yet. Ask me again on Friday.
You might be on the wrong side of the inverted U.
I mean, if I start my inverted U right now, I'm going to be a wreck by race day, considering we're recording this on Tuesday morning and my race is on Saturday. So I'm trying to keep my stuff together right now.
I guess that's true. You don't want to go into the optimal zone too early.
Yeah, don't want to peak.
Yeah, I think that's, what we're going to keep coming back to today. I sort of like to start articles or whatever, which is sort of, that's your standard paragraph, essay format.
Thesis statement?
Yeah, we have a thesis statement, our big points. And the big thing is sort of this gameplay is what I call it, or I like the phrase, make your everyday stance your battle stance. And this idea that, when we're super nervous about things and there's all these unknowns we're going to go through today, what do I wear, or what's the food I should eat? That seems to be the recurring thing this year is, setting up the bike especially for race day and this hydrating or fueling, and it's make your everyday stance your battle stance. Like there shouldn't be so many unknowns on race day that you're a complete wreck trying to figure out and make all these choices, right? All those choices, all that energy, all that nervous energy should go into that start, in a cyclocross or mountain bike race, or that critical moment where the group splits apart in the road race, right? We talk about these defining moments.
Just gave myself butterflies.
And that's really what we're training for, is to make all that other stuff irrelevant. You're used to putting leg warmers on when it's cold. You're used to tuning your bicycle daily so that it functions, right? You're used to shifting and standing and sprinting and all these little elements, so that on race day, you're just showing up and riding with a bunch of people, right? And it shakes out how it does.
So we hope.
So that's our thesis. So we'll see how we can apply this to specific things and maybe pull out. So we have some user questions? Listener questions.
Listener questions.
I don't know if they're users.
No.
That's not a good way to call them.
No, that's rude.
Okay.
Anyway, we're going to get into it now. And actually, Peter's also racing this weekend. So, again, good for us to get some of this info out. And
also an update, the collagen has dissolved.
Good job.
Yeah.
Okay.
I didn't do anything. I waited. Which maybe sometimes that's a good thing.
Yeah, which we will get into.
just wait.
All right. Anyway, our first question is sort of this idea of just a little bit of everything. The whole day is one of the freakouts, right? Just, where do you start? How do you time your warm-up, overdressing, underdressing, bike setup? It's the details that stress this person out. Just all of the timing issues that go into the day, all of the packing issues, just sort of everything. There's no one specific question. So I think I kind of wanted to put this first because I feel like there's that old saying, the devil's in the details.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is a really good example of that.
Yeah, and because it's a very general question, I'm going to go back to my overarching thesis statement, right? And basically, I have gone to keeping all of my riding accessories in one giant gear bag. A lot of times stage races will give you, it's essentially like a hockey bag, and I put little bags of all my arm warmers, leg warmers. I have one zippered bag that has my sunglasses, sunscreen, chamois cream, first aid kit, all those sort of, we'll call those ride accessories, whatever, right? So it's fairly organized, but also just a clump of everything I need to ride my bicycle. And then most days of the week, I go out and I ride my bicycle. So some days that bag is sitting on our bed.
Yeah, it's very annoying.
I'll pull it out. Some days it's in one of our cars and I'm on the side of the road changing in Toronto or wherever, and that's our life. But, a lot of people are going to the trailhead if they're mountain bikers, or going to a local park, or riding from work or whatever, going to a group ride. And so you're essentially just practicing getting dressed, riding every day, doing intervals that are easy and long and slow and hard, and eating on those rides and fueling how you want to, similar amounts. And then on race day, you show up and you maybe pin a number onto your jersey, and that's a little different, and you have to show up at a certain time, but that's just like a group ride. And then you race.
Well, there you go. Just that easy.
It is, but I think sometimes we miss that, right? And it's hard if you have, life going on. It's hard. But I think if you're a bicycle racer, you usually are riding several times a week. And I think sometimes it's that extra attention, right? How long do you warm up? Well, how long did you warm up for your interval session? What did you do? Sometimes we can do a lot better in our interval sessions if we actually warm up like we would on a race day. So practice your race warm up more, right? It often doesn't have to be that much. 15 minutes, this will be a later question too, but a lot of times people overthink the warm-up. You just need to get sweaty and breathing a little hard, right? I always think about it when I was younger, someone said, you just need to get the first crappy effort out of it, right? If you don't warm up for a mountain bike race, that first 3 minutes feels extra bad. So if you go and do a 1 or 2 minute hard hill, you'll feel that, what people would call lactate, or that burn in their legs. They'll get breathing.
Right.
Then you go to the line, and then it feels less bad.
Yeah, I've always struggled with the warm-up, because I admit, I almost, don't want to, get any of the efforts out of my legs. I really want to, hang on to any and all hard work. So I know that's why I haven't been fantastic at cyclocross, is pretty much because it would usually take me 2 laps to sort of warm up 100%. In a real way.
Yeah, and that's the defining moment, what we're calling, in the race. Are you behind at the start, or do you get gapped later in the race? And then that's the defining moment in practice. You need to practice. Mm-hmm. Your intervals are just, you're practicing for that defining moment, right? Certainly we have intervals that are more physiological based, in your base season, maybe it's not as specific, but you're always keeping that in mind. We're sprinkling those sprints, those hill climbs, those, the warm up, the cool down, It's all just practice for the race day, and that's really what we're trying to work on. And the one little tip, I guess, even for you can maybe sort of weigh in on this, but I am super anal, and my clients listening will chuckle that if they don't use the lap function on their Garmin, I go berserk. Mm-hmm. So if you make a new file for your race after you warm up, I go berserk, because that's different. That's not how we warm up and do our intervals. So now you just made this like some special, now you're doing 3 workouts in the day?
Right.
Like, what is that mindset? And so they'll say, oh, well, I want to know how long the race is. Well, there's lap distance, there's lap time, there's lap average watts, there's a lap function. So you set up your Garmin and you do your intervals like this. If you're an endurance ride, you might warm up easy for 15 minutes getting out of town, then do your 3-hour endurance ride, and then cool down when you're rolling back into town. And those might be your 3 laps. Mm-hmm. But that mindset of start, stop. Right? There's a click in your brain when you press that button. And to me, that is essential to be ready for race day, where someone else is going to say, start. And you're going to go, right? And the people that don't do that, there's the one guy on Instagram. I'm sorry if he's listening, but I would keep wanting to comment on this man's thing. He's got he doesn't use the lap button on his Garmin, so he has to tape all these durations. So like hour 23:30, his 30:30 intervals start, and then at an hour 24, he takes a break, and then an hour 24:30. And he has this written on the one picture. It was his entire top tube of these durations. And I said to Molly, just warm up. And then it's 20 minutes of 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off. You just press lap once, and then 20 minutes back and forth.
Also, you save 10 minutes of your time not writing that out.
And so that's my crisis with my busy clients is, it doesn't, it never needs to be that perfect. And I never want that, extra time, right? That's the bane of training and coaching, is that, it adds time to what should be an overly simple, a fairly simple process. We're just riding a bicycle up a hill, or around in a circle, or whatever your goal is on the bicycle.
Yeah.
So that's a bunch of general stuff. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah. That was good. All right, let's get into sort of the more esoteric question of self-talk during the race. And a lot of people commented on this. I know I've certainly had races where I've done this, where you turn off, but God knows you've been around me long enough to know my start line freak out is pretty legendary. One person said they always have a moment where they wonder what the hell they're doing this crazy thing for, fighting the urge to puke on their shoes, or, just kind of sneak your bike out of the start grid, or if you're a runner, just kind of slowly back out of that start corral, or, even just tell yourself, you know what, I'm just going to walk it or soft pedal it or whatever, and just basically take yourself out of the race. I know I struggle with that pre-race jitter a lot. And then even in the race, it sometimes takes a little bit. Or if you're in the race, and some people have said this, they're in the race and they start feeling crappy, or one thing goes wrong and suddenly they, just kind of explode. Everything sucks.
There's a lot of variations on this. There's one guy I grew up racing, and there was always this joke that if he wasn't doing well, suddenly he would just stop and let the air out of his tires.
I've been tempted to do that on many occasions.
And I did see him walking out of the forest a few times when things went, but maybe he just got flats. Maybe he got over, on the wrong side of that inverted U, and he crashed and he got a flat. Maybe that was fine. Maybe he had an arousal issue.
That's rude.
Yeah. Always brought chuckles in Psych 101. Yeah, okay, arousal. Yeah. So where do we start on that?
Let's start at the start line. So that 15 minutes before the race, half an hour before the race for some of us.
Your negative self-talk.
Yeah, just that, oh my God, what am I doing here? Why did I do this? Why is my heart rate so high? Oh my gosh, I'm freaking out. What do I do?
Well, I almost want to step back from that. So with a lot of people, I find they just need to race a bit more. So I would have them, and you have fought me a bit on this, but I feel like those people often haven't done weekly races and group rides enough. So they need to go, that's a good way to get over that. So we don't necessarily deal with it on, there's nothing I can tell you, right? In coaching, there's been a few coaching courses. I think Mike Garrigan might have invented this, but the worst thing as a coach is to go up and give a bunch of advice to this athlete who's panicking, right? They're panicking in that 15 minutes and you're like, okay, well just focus on this. And then they're going to focus only on this, right? I think they called that eating an SH apostrophe or T. I don't want to have to add the explicit logo to this podcast for today, but eating a S-word sandwich as a coach. That was the technical term for that.
I thought that was just like you say something nice, then you say something mean, then you say something nice.
No, that's like isn't that some sort of open-faced SHIT sandwich or something like that?
So that would just be saying something mean and then something nice.
Right. Well, there's so many techniques on how to give criticism. In any case, that is not the time to give advice or to suddenly fix your nerves. It's, why are you nervous and are you too nervous, right? So you always want to assess, like, everyone feels like on the World Championships start line, there's that like arousal, right? And I think it is worth looking at that as arousal or excitement, but you want to look, is it too much? And then how do we deal with that? So for me, I find that my best races come if I'm a little more social before the race, because I tend to be very introverted and overthinking. So if I talk to people and I just know, okay, I'm going to start my warm-up an hour out. So if we're going to race at noon, I know at 11, I'm dressed and I'm rolling and I'm going through that routine that I've practiced in training. Just warm up like I usually do. But I'm talking to people to stay out of my own head before that. And then I have my familiar warm-up. And then I'm on the start line for staging. And again, in the staging, I used to just sit there quietly and look grumpy. But now I try and joke around a bit and you do a little bit.
I know that's sort of unnatural for you, but
I like to make jokes. But
I'd just like to point out that even having this discussion, if you had a heart rate monitor on me right now,
right,
or like you could see brainwave patterns, you'd see that I'm already starting to freak out just thinking.
So now on the flip side, if you are someone who's maybe a little distractible, we all know like that person who just can't be focused enough, and then they maybe get to the start line and they panic. Or they're not focused enough, maybe, right? Like maybe they're on the less aroused side of the optimal U. I'll put an image of this U for those that haven't had excessive. But if you can picture this, it goes up, the arousal, the excitement.
Like a bell curve.
Yeah, and that's sort of your performance, right? So the more aroused you get, it's good until a point, and then it plummets, right? So it would be like something that's good for you, like training would have an inverted U pattern, right? A bit more training is good. You get fitter until you start overtraining, getting tired, and your performance would drop. So same thing with this arousal. Okay, so the person who then is a little crazy might do better. Maybe they have to arrive at the race a little later, just go and start their warm-up, maybe park a little further away so they don't get as much of that stimulation. Mm-hmm. Arrive at the start line, stay focused, breathing, maybe they have a cue word, something on their handlebar they're focused on, just they have their checklist they're going through, and that might be the best situation for them, right?
Yeah. I found out for me, actually, so last year at the Xterra in Kelso, it was the first year you couldn't come with me to the race, so I actually went by myself, and I really planned out how my morning was going to go, so I had my, like, really cheesy Pump Up the Jams playlist ready. I did this lovely little warm-up run by myself. I had my headphones in, so until 5 minutes before the race, I had headphones in, didn't have to talk to anyone, was just completely in my own little zone. And I realized I had probably the best race I've had because I wasn't talking to you. I wasn't talking to my dad. I can say that because he's not listening to this. I love when people are with me at the race, but I'm not someone that handles support at races very well.
Well, and sometimes, if we think about the gameplay a lot of us would end up doing, it's usually pretty isolated. You get yourself dressed, you fill your own bottles, you show up at your quote-unquote start line and you press your lap button or else you get yelled at, and you do your workout, right? Whatever that is for the day. So sometimes, like those horse blinders, you just show up, you get out of your car, you put your stuff on, you put, the plates on the bike or whatever, and then, you warm up and then you show up at the line and
go to work.
So you're trying to minimize the amount of things the stimuli that you're exposed to, right? Mm-hmm. And that's why a lot of people, you'll see a lot of pros just warm up in a tent facing the wall with earphones on, just so there's not, you're not trying to figure out where you're warming up at a new venue. It's the exact same routine every single time, right? They take their clothes out of the bag, they get on the trainer, they do the same warm up, they go to the start line at the same time, right? Mm-hmm. So then you're eliminating those new stimuli, right? So that you're ready to make those decisions, those high-speed decisions during the race.
Yeah, and then I think the only last thing I'd say about start line nerves is a couple years ago I started doing this thing where I tap my thumb to my index finger, middle finger, ring finger, pinky finger, just sort of over and over again when I'm on the start line.
Now, that was in the Brave Athlete book, they talked about that. What, didn't they? Some sort of tapping thing.
They had some sort of tapping thing, but I'd been doing this for a few years beforehand.
Or was that a Matt Fitzgerald, or was that
I'm not sure. I'm sure I've read about it, but I found that really helped calm me down at the start line, just because it gave me some kind of tactile thing to focus on. So now I even do it before talks and pretty much before anything that's stressing me out, and some kind of reflexology bits and pieces help with that, but I think it's more just having this thing that I know is like, okay, you're in the zone now. It's about to be go time. This is both like calming and kind of like
getting
I think
me ready. Some breathing practice, right? However you want to go about that, just that calming deep breath is something, in regular life I use often, right? When you get frustrated or you have to wait or you have to, do something, like you say, do a talk that you have to get a little amped up for. Sometimes that breath of just like refocus is important. And I mean, even during a race, that refocus, if you crash or, it's coming into that last lap and I guess, is that question here or are we on the next one? But those moments in the race that everyone has, you quit, and that there's a spectrum of quitting, but if you let go of that wheel, you're quitting, right? Mm-hmm. Like, you might finish the race, but you've let go of that defining moment, right? And everyone has those, but is it the Matt Fitzgerald book is How Bad Do You Want It?
Yeah.
That's ultimately it, especially, when everyone's tight. There's, how hard are you willing to go, or how deep into that red zone, right? So when you get to that point, you have to be ready and focused, right? And sometimes that refocusing on what matters right now is what's missing.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm going to just throw out the caveat to all of this, which is just like, you know what? I don't think anyone listening here is getting paid a crap load to race. So, two things. If it's not fun, maybe it's time to rethink why you're doing it and maybe consider taking a break off of racing to start missing it and actually wanting to do it again. If you really feel like this every single race. And, the second part is really just, like, remembering, like, when you're on that start line and you're freaking out, like, what is the worst case scenario? Like, oh, you finished last? Like, is your family gonna love you any less? Are you not gonna make your paycheck? If you're not getting paid to race, like, no, your paycheck doesn't depend on this. It just doesn't matter that much.
Yeah, I see that a lot with the Type A's that I coach, right? Like, there's no reason to expect that they're going to win. Like, they're new to the sport. No one, there's legitimate, like, people that are getting paid in their race, and they've built it up that, like, they've trained all winter and, this is going to be their one shot,
At what?
and that's the thing is, like, we're building experience here, right? And, I use the analogy sometimes of with some of the younger males that I coach, they train for 3 months in California and then they show up at the first big race and they're expecting to win, and sometimes they build this up, and that's as much my fault for letting expectations get out of control. But, I don't even think in their head that they necessarily think they're going to win because they haven't really prepared for that defining moment. But they think they're going to do good, but it's a really vague good. Mm-hmm. So they're building this up, and it's vague what they're actually trying to do.
Yeah.
And so they're almost doomed for failure, right? But if they are going to show up and try and, improve their start spot is a big thing in mountain biking, or, you have some process goals for the race. Like, when you get to that defining moment, go around the person rather than being the person getting dropped. Like, that's your only goal for the race. When it gets super hard and there's 4 people slugging it out, or you're racing for that singles, or it's all stringing out in that road race and that wheel's dangling, like, finish your race there. Like, that's not finish, but that's your race. It's not the start line of the race, right? Like, because that's the furthest you've gotten. It's like a video game. You just need to get to level 4. You don't worry about level 10. You just need, if you're done on level 3, like, you're done.
No, I remember my first piece of advice when I did my first road race in college was my teammate Don just told me, like, at literally all costs, you hold on to the wheel in front of you. Mm-hmm. Like, you don't drop that wheel or you've lost the race. And, like, that's fine if that's, just know that when you drop that, like, when that wheel drops, like, you're off. You're not going to win the race.
Yeah, and I think, again, the race goes better if your every day is closer to the race. Like, there's a lot of times we show up, and you can show up underprepared, but the expectation on the line should be lower. That's when, you're there to participate and just chill. You'll probably have a great race if you chill. But if you're underprepared and you show up thinking you got to do as well as you always did, now that's where that arousal gets, because now you're hugely threatening your ego, and you're also underprepared. So if you're going to go out with the same strategies, same expectations, and then you're going to have a mismatch of those expectations to the actual, right? Mm-hmm. But I have a couple friends who are great racers. They have good experience behind them, but they're often underprepared. But they roll out last and they make some jokes, and then as the race goes on, they pick people off and they feel better. You know, their expectations are higher, or sorry, low. You know, they don't have high expectations, but oh, I'm passing this guy who trains all the time. Look at that guy, right? And they do a good job on the things they can control, like they fuel during the race, their bike is ready to go. You know, so I think that's planning those expectations rationally, and then in 3 to 6 months beforehand, if we're going to prepare and really put a lot of ego on the line for a 3-hour mountain bike race, well, then we need to be doing 3-hour bicycle, quote unquote, races. We need to be preparing for this, right? A significant amount of climbing, riding off road, climbing. And then it's not a big deal. Your everyday stance is your battle stance, right?
Yeah, there we go.
Let's move on to the next one. Common themes, but that was a good, but again, sort of general question.
Okay, so the next one is actually family issues, and I feel like you probably have a lot of clients that deal with this. One person is saying her and her husband both race, so she has, she struggles with trying to be both like thoughtful and helpful to him as he is to her, while trying to like maintain focus on her own race. A dad whose kids are always there. He said, nerve-wracking anxiety is. Part of it is just fearing that his son is getting cold or is hungry or, is running through the woods. We know a couple that tend to get lost in the woods because they start chasing frogs.
They're pretty awesome kids.
Yeah, they are pretty sweet kids. They always make it out of the woods, for the record. And then even for some moms that are still breastfeeding, even we know a lot of moms that are amazing runners and they're racing riders, and they're racing, and their babies are still breastfeeding, and there's definitely a bit of struggle. We actually babysat for a couple races last season for our friend who was racing, but her pretty young baby is here with me, and for her to get out of her head and stop worrying that I'm meandering around with very little common sense about babies.
Yeah, we were probably the worst people that could have asked. But
moral of the story, don't leave your children with us.
But they were fine. They had a good time.
Yes. They survived. But anyway, yeah.
So I think there's lots of good ideas there. I mean, again, we can only draw, I have clients who are in this boat. They have both parents are racing, or just mom or dad are there, and maybe the other partner isn't at the race. So it's just, we'll say mom in this case, is there with a couple kids, and she's going to race, which is great. I think that's the healthiest situation versus parents there, just kids racing is tougher, right? Because then all the pressure's on the kids. So the nice thing is if it's a family thing, and this is the normal for the family, to me, we see a lot of high performance families, we'll call them there. Everyone does well.
Yeah.
Pretty good balance, but there's just this expectation that this is what you do. You ride your bike, or you run, or you rock climb as a family.
Happier, healthier families, for sure.
Right, and a lot of events have all sorts of levels. It's not that you have to be an elite cyclist, but there's a way to be a beginner mountain biker, right, and participate with your kids. So that would be my first suggestion. This isn't really the question, but to participate as a family as much as possible is great. I always try and I have very poor success with this, but my dad used to come a lot and still comes occasionally, and I try and, rather than have him just stand in the feed zone where he doesn't see anything, I've a couple times got him you're gonna go walk and go that way.
But he loves the feed zone.
He does like the action and talking to people, right? But at the same time, mountain biking, you don't really know what it's about, so I got him to go walk, and then that way he had a mission for the day, and he went on a little adventure and got out into the forest, and he sees more of the race that way, so he actually does enjoy it. But then, he's actually getting some movement in, right? So it's, again, not just about me and him dedicating his whole day to standing in the feed zone to hand me a bottle that, it's not that big of a deal. We can figure that out. So let's get to the question then.
Yeah, how do you actually handle having kids that you're worried about?
I think the big thing is, let's start with the warm-up. I would just practice really short warm-ups, or just very little warm-ups, and or practice easing into your intervals and your races and stuff, right? So a lot of the moms we know are actually pretty good, but we know a range of people. And I think that's, a lot of times there isn't. I've seen like from breastfeeding to start line and then ease through the race and then like winning some decent races actually.
Yeah.
And that's just the nature, right? Our good friends actually, and then Scott was just, he had the kids right before because Kate was finishing her race. And then, I don't think he warmed up, but I don't know that he ever warms up. So that's why he said, this is a great warm up. And I was like, I think this is better than your normal warm up.
To be fair, he handed me the stroller and left on his warm up.
Oh,
so
okay. There you go. So I think that's a few things, right? That might just be your battle stance might be a really short warm up for your battle stance. And then the other thing is drawing on people like Molly. I think there's a lot of there's a lot of like grandmothers. There's a lot of people that like kids. There's someone who already has kids. Maybe
just want to be clear here, like Molly, not actually Molly.
So sometimes these things, like I think we've gotten away this is more of a general statement on humanity, but that like communal, right? Like that communal parenting, right? There's a lot of some of the kids clubs and stuff, right? Like it's just like you say, the kids are running all around. No one's really watching the kids, but everyone's sort of watching the kids. Mm-hmm. And so I would try and draw a bit on that to buy yourself a bit of time and some, because the other question was, I'm worried they're off in the forest. But if it's like, hey, don't go anywhere unless you're with like these couple other kids, or talk to the couple other parents and like, hey, I'm racing at 10, could you keep like an extra eye on the kids? That might be something to do.
I think there's also something to be said for like static warm-ups even. Like, okay, you can't get out and run a mile, or you can't ride part of the course or whatever because you have your kid, but can you use a trainer instead? Or
a few of the moms I know have done that
for running or riding, or I mean even just like do some jumping jacks or something if like you really can't leave.
I think for running you could definitely get really good. I mean, it's debatable how much really running, especially depending on the race you're doing, right? Yeah. But I think you could get away, and then that would just be your normal. Like you always start with like a lunge matrix type sequence, maybe a little toe hopping.
Just getting the blood flowing a little bit.
Yeah, a bit of mobility and a bit of sort of jumping for, skipping would be maybe an option that's easy for running. So
just creating these, kind of hacks around the warm-up, I think.
Even just strides, right? You could essentially leave even a baby and just like back and forth in front of the car if you had to, right?
Yeah.
If you were running. So is there anything else in that question, or is that sort of some ideas? I think that community, re-envisioning what your warm-up is and then training for a short warm-up, right? So the classic, like, I think Team Sky had one, which I guess is now debatable, but, and it was like a slow ramp for 10 minutes and then a couple sprints. And then that was like the warm-up they were using for TTs and stuff. So, I think that 10 to 15 minutes is plenty, and that probably changes what a lot of people would be doing normally. Mm-hmm. So...
Okay, yeah, let's move on to the next one, which is one of my personal favorites / my biggest issues, which is the night before. So one person said, I have the fear of oversleeping and then not sleeping at all the night before as a result, which I am so familiar with. I'll wake up every hour on the hour looking at the clock thinking it's, my alarm has turned off and oh God, it's time to go. Panicking that you might have forgotten something. Trying not to get more amped, visualizing the start days prior to the start day. So like I was kind of saying, we joked about this at the beginning where I'm like, oh crap, now I'm getting nervous just recording this podcast because I'm thinking about my race this weekend. And am I wasting my adrenaline and my energy on getting pumped up talking about this race? And I had nightmares about forgetting my jersey last night. So clearly I'm already getting into that night before zone, so help.
Yeah, I still go back. A lot of the people, this is a general statement, but a lot of people who have these race nerves are also the people who are nervous about intervals or nervous about, especially testing, the like CP20 test, right? And I think if you won't go do some weekly races or, the local crid or the local group right now, or if you find that doesn't make you nervous, then like get a coach to just give you tests and put the word test in bold, and warm up for that like a race and do them, because it doesn't really matter, right? Like it's all just this cluster is the term they use for it, but it's an average, right? Like one day doesn't really matter, but it's that over time, like who are you as an athlete, right? Mm-hmm. So one day of training doesn't matter. One race doesn't matter. it's over time, right? But a lot of times we build it all to this one moment defining our ego, right? But it's not one moment, it's over time, right? So start today with what is the thing you're nervous about and practice that. So what are we nervous about?
Everything.
Well, you said we're nervous about
forgetting like helmets and jerseys and stuff. That's
okay. So
what?
So I had my gear bag is my
Yeah.
system. Some people like checklists. So having that all packed, start packing it 2 days before if you're nervous about it. Put it all in the car, right? Like, and when you drive to the race, like put your helmet and your shoes and like wear your kit. Like I wear my chamois and people are always like, wow, you wear your chamois all day? I'm like, yeah, because I'm not forgetting my chamois and I don't want to change in the middle of public at the race. So it was always just stressful and delayed my whole pre-race routine. So I just started wearing my chamois to the race and, you know.
There you go.
So, and the shoes, I can see them because I'm pretty obsessive compulsive in that I forgot my shoe. Sometimes I'll bring 2 sets of shoes, just,
Yeah, I think the other thing to remember with sleep, Amy Bender said this in our podcast, gosh, almost 2 years ago.
It's a little hard to listen to because it was early. She's a little quiet. Yeah, but great. I think if you can like bluff your way through it or, try it on different earphones, there's some nuggets in there that are quite good for sleep.
So she's been studying sleep for years and years and years. She has her PhD and did all of her research in sleep hygiene and stuff like that. And one of the things she told us was just that like one night of sleep is just not going to make or break your race day. It's really about like, how have you been sleeping the couple weeks before? So, if you're a really nervous sleeper the night before a race, probably start going to bed earlier in the weeks before the race so you have kind of that bank of sleep and you're not coming into it a little low.
Well, and again, this sounds a lot like it's not the training for today. It's not the test today. It's not the race today. It's who are you in these last 90 days, these last 3 months, these last 6 months? Have you been sleeping or no? Because all these hormonal statuses and, the way you use do you maintain your blood sugar? Do you there's all these factors that actually do influence your endurance and your fitness a fair bit, but also more importantly, your health. For sleep, circadian rhythm, if you're not used to going to bed at 9, you go to bed at 11 because you're up working or watching Netflix, and then on race day, you decide you're going to go to bed at 9. Well, of course, you're going to have trouble getting to sleep. That's not the time you go to bed.
Yeah.
Right? So it's that discipline every single day. And again, we're not all elite athletes, so your discipline can be an 80% discipline, but that's the thing. Like, it's not the night before, right? Like, there's lots of stories of people having McDonald's and, being up all night and then actually having an okay race. And a lot of it's just because they weren't probably expecting much on race day, but their 3 months before were great.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think that's freeing from a nervous standpoint, but now you're going to have to show up every single day, right? That show up is sort of often one of my refrains is you just got to show up. Most of life is if you show up every day, you'll do fine.
But the bright side of this is you have to show up to go to sleep. So really, how bad is that?
Right. And so Amy's point was that it doesn't really matter. I'll link to her podcast and I'll also link to, there's a good infographic that sort of talks about this a bit. But I think making sure that you're not changing your usual so much that you're now not sleeping because you went to bed 2 hours earlier is part of it. Making your list so that you're not thinking about stuff, journaling, right? Set reminders for yourself. Whatever you're thinking about, just keep writing.
Yeah.
I used to go in my pre-race journal, which is something I recommend people do, schedule out the day, draw out your race course, have a race plan. After the race, how did it go? What did you learn? What do you do different next time? What should you work on? What is your defining moment to work on next week? But in the corner, that top left, I would always write back burner. And I'd always have work and school and things I was stressed about in life. And I just put them under back burner. And I found that was just like a plop. Like, it's not in my brain anymore. I focus on the race for the next 24 hours. Mm-hmm. And then, after the race, I would go back to working and everything else. So sometimes that journaling, however you want to do it, is a good way to sort of get to sleep.
I like that.
Along with just keeping your bedtime usual. And I think we should put in here, like, is nutrition coming down the pipe here as well? Or?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay. But it's the same thing for food. Your pre-race, you don't need a pasta super party. Just eat well for your training in the 3 months before and you'll be fine.
Yeah, pretty much. Well, actually, so on that note, let's maybe just talk nutrition, a lot of people have making sure that they eat, drink, especially in the morning. Someone said their nerves get in the way of nutrition. And again, this is one that I can totally relate to. I remember just like nibbling on a bagel. Like, granted, I don't do bagels on race mornings anymore, but when I first started, I'd have one and I would just be like mouse bites of it. And it was so hard to get down in the morning because I was so nervous.
A lot of people struggle with eating before stuff like that. I mean, if the race is early enough, you don't even really need to. You could just start fueling, in your warm up and early in the race. Depending on the race, it might not even matter, right? Like something like Leadville, it starts at 6 a.m. It's a, between 6 and 12-hour ordeal for people.
Well, Ironman, we just ate Cliff Bars.
I think, and I had an Ensure. Yeah. So it's one of those things, right? Like it's you're not so concerned about the healthfulness often of the fuel. It's really you want to have sort of top up those glycogen stores, maintain blood glucose, and then also just avoid vomiting. So you're sort of in between those two poles. Mm-hmm. Not to overuse the inverted U, but there would be an inverted U of nutrition, right? So if it's a very early race, you could just really just start into your race fueling and just not bother with breakfast. I do think some people do really well with the simplicity of something like an Ensure, which again is not nutritionally that sound, but gives you some calories and some sugar, and it's pretty digestible. That's sort of what it's made for.
Any of those like instant breakfasty type things, Carnation has
some people do really well, and that might be even just a short-term fix to get you doing something. I mean, you could certainly do. There's lots of different products out there now. That are maybe a little bit more, less additives and stuff. But again, I used Ensure for Ironman, right? Like the Ironman's not paleo, so the way we went. And I knew from back in the day that used to be what we would always do is like 2 or 3 Ensures, and then we'd race our mountain bike race, and it was fine. So I think that. Yeah, and then just practicing, right? Like I think some people just aren't used to eating beforehand, but if it's early, like what races were your races later that you were sort of nibbling this bagel?
Yeah, I've just literally never had a race where I haven't had a hard time eating beforehand. Even if the race was a cross race at 3 p.m., I will struggle all day to eat.
Just being so nervous.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, I think just trying to do more liquids and, whatever you can get down, right? Whatever's really appetizing.
Yeah, a lot of triathlons also would be like around like 8:39 start time, which is like that awkward. You kind of have to get up, usually around like 5:36 just to get to the place, get parked, get your transition stuff. And then you're kind of already in race mode at 3 hours before the race. So like, even though you have plenty of time to eat, your body has your brain has kicked you into this nervous race mode.
Yeah, I mean, it would depend on the person and the race, but something like even some of the recovery, like recovery potions and stuff might be okay. Totally. Something like, there's all the Vega things, just a little bit of something in there might be good again, especially if it's a shorter race. If we're talking like a cyclocross race or something, or a sprint triathlon where the intensity's coming up, it would probably be a good idea to try something, but again, trying to time that and get your brain sort of wrapped around this is how I eat, this is the timing of the eating. You see people not practicing that a lot, and that's where the confusion gets around. But try and be disciplined about maybe you have eggs, vegetables for breakfast because you work, and then if you train at 5 or 6 p.m., that 2 or 3 o'clock you sort of have that pre-workout meal, which is your typical some carbohydrate and some protein, right? So that might be your rice and eggs, or some people do like a yogurt and some cereal, or berries and a banana and a Cliff Bar or something like this, right? Like whatever that pre-race thing is you think you should do, you've decided you want to do, then you need to actually practice having that, digesting it, and then doing your workout.
Yeah. And
then hopefully that makes it a little bit more of that routine for race morning, right? There's sort of a lot of stuff wrapped up in there. Like, why are you so nervous on race morning? Is that, you haven't raced very much? Have you not prepared for those critical moments? What are you nervous about? So sort of asking these questions, I find, is often what can we then prepare about better for in the coming weeks, right? What can we simulate, right? So again, if someone was really nervous about, oh yeah, there's a lot of people on the line, I don't know how I'm going to do that, then you just drill yourself with weekly races for a while, and you get used to it, right? You win some, you lose some. Some people are faster, some people are slower, right? And you just get the start, this person saying go, you get used to people around you, right?
So do I get credit for, we actually started helping out our friends with this thing, the Calling Road Off-Road Cycling Club.
Cork.bike.
Cork.bike.
That's a website if you didn't know. The
Yeah.
.bike domain.
If you want more info. We actually kicked off last Thursday, and I guess that was my weekly race, if you will, just because my friend Tori and I kind of like led out for the first little hill. So I feel like that was my weekly race effort ahead of this upcoming stage race. That counts, right? Went really hard for a couple minutes.
I mean, I certainly, there's an element there, right? Because there's a bit of an ego to that, and yeah, I think that's fine. I mean, it's you have to do it at whatever level you're at, right? A weekly race might be too much. You know, I have some clients who, you know, it's just easing them back into group rides, you know, maybe after an injury or something, and, you know, you go similar to the standard concussion protocol, like you ride on your own, you maybe ride, you know, with a friend, just one friend, then you ride with like a group of 4 that you're comfortable with, then you go to a group ride, then you go to a, you know, weekly race, then you go to a full race or something like this, right? And then you're getting exposed gradually. The other thing you can do that sometimes works really well, like I know when I went to a World Cup in Europe and just got completely overwhelmed, like I can remember being so nervous and so scared, and the memories I have are just so overwhelming in my mind. And all of a sudden, every other race I ever did, you know, in Canada or, you know, US, the domestic stuff, and then certainly local races, right? Like it actually took a bit to get excited enough for them sometimes, right?
I remember I read something in Triathlete magazine probably 10 years ago that was just this woman writing about her workouts, and, you know, one of the things she reminded herself was just like, I did Ironman. I can handle 2 more minutes of this interval. So I feel like since then I've used the like, I did Ironman. Like, I can get through this like 30-mile race or this hour-long race or any of that. Like, it might not be pretty, but like, I did an Ironman. It's fine.
Yeah, and I think a lot of us have things like that to draw for. I don't think I'd ever tell someone to do an Ironman to do that. But yeah, I mean, a lot of us have done crazy things.
Exactly.
You know, I don't know if mothers use that, but I mean, I feel like that's a pretty...
I gave birth, yeah.
How much pain have you put up with, right? And I don't know, you know, a lot of people say they come back and they, you know, actually still race quite well. And I don't know if it's shift in perspective, like things don't maybe, you know, you have so much going on that race just is like funner, or is more fun sometimes. But also maybe that pain threshold too changes. So, I mean, draw from whatever you have for sure. And that's, you know, you can frame things like that, you know, 1 more minute. Like it's 1 more minute, right? And
yeah, you can do anything for 1 more minute. This actually, nutrition kind of led into this next question that I want to tackle. We're running low on time here, but I want to hit a couple more. And the one is the inevitable peeing, pooping question. So everyone who's raced early knows the struggle is real with that morning bell movement issue pre-race. Some people have an easier time than others. Some people have too easy of a time. Some people are kind of nervous peers, so even on the start line you like feel like you really need to pee even though you probably don't, but the feeling is very real.
Yeah.
So
I think there is a everyday stance to this one as well. It's a more of a squatting stance, but so I think you can definitely train the timing of that. So that's where the bedtime and stuff routine, but it's definitely hard if you're nervous, or, you know, that will go one of the 2 ways you described as far as bowel movements. It'll either be easier or more difficult. If it's earlier, right? Like we did Ironman at, I don't know what time it started, 6, but we were up quite early. So it's, you know, I'm used to waking up at 6:30 and have made that a focus so that like it happens soon after. But sometimes it's tough, right? So I mean, people will go to coffee for sure to help with that, you know. And triathlon, I think there's even Ironman, you'll see people running.
I was gonna say, actually,
jumping up and down.
If you read Iron War by Matt Fitzgerald, which is one of my like all-time favorite books, he mentions that Dave Scott would always run a couple miles in the morning before Ironman, and people thought he was crazy. Like, why the hell would you run 2 miles, you know, before you're about to go for, you know, 140.6? And it was to go. You know, for a lot of people, the run will loosen things up and
I would say a lot of people do, right? And that might even be a sort of healthy habit you could start doing, is just throw on your shoes and, you know, do a quick run out the door. Or,
we do love those morning runs.
You know, even, I don't know if jumping in the house would have the same effect, but you could certainly do some, you know, I've been a big fan of sort of that two legs hopping together.
Apologies to the downstairs neighbors.
And then, single leg hopping together and just watching for alignment there with the hips. For a lot of runners, that's really nice for the calves and the feet. But then also might have that effect of sort of speeding things up. But I think it's practicing. Like, if you know you have that early triathlon and that's a defining moment for you, then that's important. I've also had races where it just didn't happen, and I don't know. I've rarely had it as an issue. So
these are bike races. Trust me when I say in a running race, it is an issue.
Well, I've had that too. And so, again, I wonder, though, how many of those people, like, it definitely happens to even the best, right?
Right side, your mile split for whatever mile you're aiming for the porta potty is actually probably going to be on par because you're going faster to get there.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's, you could play with different things in training, right? Like, I think training at that time is a big thing, so that your body, I think, does learn when you're running to hold on to it a little better. You condition those muscles. And then also, I think if you're just timing things like that, I think you'll find that you're able to get it. You're less nervous about it. You're used to waking up and putting your shoes on and going. So I just don't think I think if you practice, like, I think it comes back to that gameplay.
Yeah.
That's my refrain for most things, but.
True. If you do find that you are just like peeing just so often in these cases, I would actually say it might not be the worst thing to go to a pelvic floor therapist and just get everything checked out, because sometimes there are ways you can strengthen your pelvic floor so you don't have this intense urge to pee when you're running.
Certainly if it's during the run. Like, beforehand, the nervous pee, like, you could be over drinking. That's definitely a thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, and the other thing I wanted to add is just more practical is, if you're a nervous peer, or that you have to often pee before a race, just give yourself that time to get to the porta potty and get to the start line. The worst thing is like getting to the start line and being like, oh boy, I either missed my chance or like now I'm like rushing and it's even more stressful.
I think so, because if you make that your routine, like, you get to the start line 15 minutes before and you go to the porta potty and then you worry about getting into the line. Like, it always seems like a rush and then you stand there for a long time. It's not really that crazy. You just make that part of your routine, and then by a similar thing, like, you're used to doing that in your normal workouts too, right?
Yeah.
A bit of a warm up, and then maybe you take a bathroom break. So I think that's probably the critical things. I think definitely watching the overhydration, similar to overfueling, on race day, right? I think that's where some of that GI and some of that peeing a ton beforehand, even peeing during, having a heavy bladder. Again, we don't need to. Dave Scott actually tweeted this just the other day, the same triathlon legend that Molly was referencing. So he does some coaching and stuff now, but was one of the top Ironmanners in the 80s, early 90s. And he sort of said the same thing, like, stop doing these massive, like, refeeds or trying to overfeed yourself the day before these things. Most of us aren't doing Ironman tomorrow either, right? Like, these races often are not that long and excruciating.
Yeah, for sure.
And just overhydrating, right? Like, if you're generally hydrated, you'll be fine. And then just, don't, make sure you drink during the race as required and go from there.
Yeah. Okay, so a lot of the other questions kind of centered around this morning timing. So like, oh, parking is really stressful. Like, oh God, when do I get to the course in the morning? I think my general advice for that, and I'm just going to say this as a blanket statement, is like, plan to be there half an hour before you want to be there. Just give yourself the extra time. You can always just like nap in the car, listen to a podcast, listen to your music, download a couple. I've actually done it where I've downloaded a couple episodes off of Netflix. So if I'm there crazy early, I don't mind. I'm just chilling out and like keeping my, heart rate low, just kind of zoning out. And then, when it does get into like where my warm up window and that kind of stuff starts, I'm there, I'm chill, I'm not stressed on finding a parking spot or like where I put my shoes or, oh crap, there's traffic getting into the park, any of that stuff. So just plan to be there earlier than you want to be.
And I would, again, whether that's in a paper journal with your sort of race plan, like I was saying, which is a good practice for anyone who's newer to racing. We use it with our younger athletes, but I think if your race age, your athlete age is younger especially, or if you've never done it, it's worth doing. But, even in your Google Calendar, so you can plan your day, the race is from 1 till 3. The start is 15 minutes before. You want to warm up for 45 minutes. It takes you half an hour to find your tights and put them on in the race.
And get your numbers.
So then you sort of back that out and put those little things all time stamped, and then you'll know what time you need to leave. And like Molly says, leave some skew time around all that so you're not rushed.
Yeah, because I think the worst thing is to be rushed. Like, you're never going to be that annoyed that you're 20 minutes early and you got 20 minutes less sleep. Because, like, frankly, most of you, and I include myself in this, aren't sleeping that great the night before anyway.
Well, and you don't want to use that, again, when we're thinking about decisions, you only have so much decision-making energy, and then you don't want any extra stress, as much as you can avoid. There's always going to be stuff, but... so if you're swearing at someone out the car window and the lights are all turning at the wrong time and then there's a detour and then the parking guy is, stupid at the race and he's putting you in the back of the parking spot and, whatever happens, I always think, what if I got a flat? Would I still make the race? Would it be, that ruin the whole day, or do I have enough time here that I could conceivably fix a flat?
I think you've known people who've gotten both a flat tire on their car and on their bike in the same day.
Yeah, sometimes people are looking for excuses like that, but in any case, plan out your day. I'd give it a try, right? And I think you'll find that that's pretty helpful in this overarching nerves thing, because it's preparation, which is sort of your main defense.
Yeah. And then last question is just dressing right. And I mean, I know you've had years and years of experience with this, so I'll let you tackle it. I'm sure we're going to come back to practice and gameplay.
Yeah, so just game playing.
New thing here.
Yeah.
Totally new concept to this podcast.
The one thing I always find helpful, and again, people can find their own, like I tend to be on the cold side of things. Like I prefer to just sweat more. So I'll overdress often. But there's a couple like landmarks that I have. Where at 15 degrees I uncover my legs, and for racing, if it was cyclocross, I'd probably go down a little lower.
A great man once told us,
yeah,
you don't win races in leg warmers.
Yeah, and I mean, definitely you need to take that. If you're really going for it, then some of this leg warmer and how hot, how warm you dress will change. But I think as you train in more conditions and do intervals, especially in different conditions, you start figuring out what works and how to peel layers. But I feel like people overthink, like you sort of have your race day, whatever your kid is, right? And usually the season's fairly stable. And then as it gets colder, you have a rainier race or something like that, right? Then that's where maybe you add something like arm warmers, or a vest or a rain jacket for the road, or different lenses for sunglasses, different gloves for the road is especially very critical.
So I'm gonna just throw a random scenario at you. Say it's 62 degrees, so like 15, 16 Celsius, and rainy but not pouring. How would you dress for a road race, for example?
I see it's tougher on the road for sure, because then you have wind and spray and stuff. So I would be most concerned about lenses for the glasses.
Thankfully we have those clear glasses.
Yeah, and you could maybe go with a hat or something, but you're going to want a rain jacket. And then you want to have practiced, ideally, the rain jacket coming on and off. Because that's the main thing is, oh, damn, it cleared up. Or, oh, damn, we're on this mountain and now I'm sweating a ton, right? So just even being able to unzip and zip things up is going to let you customize that.
I just don't think I'll wear a rain jacket, because that was my nemesis at Paris-to-Ancaster last season. It was freezing. It was probably 35, so just about freezing. And I started in a rain jacket, and within the first 2 minutes, I knew I made a huge mistake.
Yeah, so I mean, I would be most concerned about, like, I would maybe go 16 degrees is a tough one, but you're over that threshold, right? So to me, you'd probably be okay with uncovered legs then.
Thankfully, Mad Alchemy is a sponsor, so we have their
and
imbrication.
You could certainly use some warming oil. I would maybe go with gloves that are going to be a little bit warmer, because those aren't hard to take off.
Sure.
If you need to. Something that's made to have grip in the rain. And then again, like, if your chance of hitting the deck is also higher, so I'm also thinking just protecting hands, right? Because hands are delicate. Sure. Yeah, and to me, the lens is like just sort of being able to see and being able to customize sort of how warm you are. So they'll make thermal jerseys sometimes. You could put a vest on, and then the vest is pretty easy to like open up as well, and has the backs open for breathing. So something that's going to just cover and keep you a little warmer from the wind as you get cold, right? Because it's 16, but once you get soaking wet and now you're moving at 40 kilometers an hour.
Sure.
then that's going to get cold. So
yeah, for sure.
But the big thing is just the more you ride, the more you figure out sort of what works for you, right? And you make mistakes, and sometimes you're cold, sometimes you're warm, and unzip, zip up.
Well, conveniently,
take your gloves off.
It's about 60 and rainy here today, so I guess I'm gonna go out and gameplay that a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I think we're going to wrap up there. If you guys have any other questions about racing or about anything else athlete related, hit us up over at consummateathlete.com. We'd love it if you enjoyed this episode, if you feel like, this is going to help you with your racing this season, if you could leave us a rating or review over on iTunes. You can do it in your browser on your computer now or just through your phone, whichever. We would greatly, greatly appreciate it. As always, thank you so much for listening and enjoy your week, and happy racing to anyone who's heading out to the races this weekend. Hey guys, before you go, we just wanted to have one quick word from our sponsor, Health IQ.
Health IQ is a life insurance company that helps the consummate athlete like you save money on your life insurance.
To find out more, you can check out healthiq.com/CAPOD. That's CAPOD. For all the details and to take a free quiz. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Consummate Athlete Podcast. To check out all of the show notes for this show, go to consummateathlete.com, and to follow along with our various adventures on the social medias, you can check us out on Facebook at facebook.com/consummateathlete, or follow me, Molly Herford, at Molly J. Herford on Twitter and Instagram.
And I'm at Peter Glassford on Twitter and Instagram.
And if you could do us a huge favor and rate and review the podcast over on iTunes, that helps us bring on more guests, get more episodes out, and do more cool stuff. So we would be forever grateful.
And if you're looking for coaching for endurance sport or just for health and wellness, you can check out smartathlete.ca. And for amazing outdoor content, you can check out theoutdooredit.com.
Aw, honey.
And that's theoutdooredit.com for Molly Herford's writing and all things outdoors.
All right. Thank you so much for listening, guys, and we'll see you next time.